Hey everyone, welcome to Along Those Lines. This is a podcast about America's electric cooperatives, the work they do, and the challenges they face. I'm your host, Scot Hoffman. Today we're talking about the impacts of the 2018 federal elections and specifically what co-op priorities will be emerging during this new Congress. In the studio, we have two experts on co-op legislative and regulatory priorities. Kirk Johnson, he's NRECA's Senior Vice President for Government Relations, and John Cassady, he's NRECA's Vice President for Legislative Affairs. Kirk, John, welcome to the podcast. Let's start by doing a little look back at 2018. I want this to kind of be mostly about what's going to happen going forward, but 2018 was a big year, huge election. Was it a good year for co-ops?
Well, let's start off by saying it was a very productive year for electric co-ops. Going back to the beginning of the year, when we passed legislation to extend certain energy tax credits that we cared about, we got vegetation management legislation that we've been working on for years past. Cadillac tax again got kicked down the road. So we had a really good productive start at the beginning of the year in Congress. And up in the executive branch agencies, we've managed to make progress on getting a new definition of waters of the U.S. out of the EPA and Army Corps of Engineers. The EPA is making progress on replacing the Clean Power Plan. We've seen good work on Endangered Species Act issues, and USDA has made progress on rural broadband. So I think all in all, we've made some definite progress on some areas. Definitely more work to be done in 2019. But John, what would you add?
Yeah, Kirk, I think you've hit a lot of top-line successes for our members, and it came in a year that has had unique political challenges. So the issues that Kirk just highlighted were the result of some very focused advocacy, and we think delivered significant value for the co-ops this year.
I guess the most recent one is the Farm Bill.
The Farm Bill is one of those bills, just about every 5 years. There are programs at USDA that need to be reauthorized. The Farm Bill usually comes around once every 5 years or so. And it's also typically a very bipartisan exercise. So those factors contribute to some predictability, and we were busy right out of the gate. That led to a lot of outreach, a lot of opportunities for testimony, a lot of direct engagement with lawmakers. And we came out pretty well across the board on all of our priorities: broadband, rural development, our core rural electrification programs. And I'd say on the balance, it was a strong bill that we engaged in and that our members, I think, will be happy with.
Yeah.
It was one of those bills where we had to be engaged in a different way this year, because usually in the Farm Bill we're playing a lot of offense and it's good and we're scoring touchdowns. This time we had to play some defense on the broadband piece that John mentioned. There were folks trying to limit USDA's ability to make those funds available to electric cooperatives, and so we had to make sure we were pushing those folks back. And then the Senate Ag Committee decided to give us a direct shot on the Cushion of Credit program, and fortunately, after a lot of work, and a lot of members from NRECA contacting their U.S. senators and members of the House, were able to push back on that a little bit and make some lemonade out of those lemons. So it was interesting having to play more defense on this Farm Bill than we have had to play the past couple Farm Bills we've worked on.
Talk a little bit more about that. We've been in a fairly polarized congressional situation for a decade or so. What is it about this particular Congress that made you have to play defense this time?
Yeah, on the Farm Bill, it wasn't so much a partisan issue that we were playing defense on. The Cushion of Credit, when we went and met with the Senate Ag Committee back in June, the Republican top staff and the Democratic top staff were both in there, and they delivered the message to us that they were making the change to Cushion of Credit. It was bipartisan. They had locked arms. And so it was really a situation because they needed to raise money, I should say they wanted to raise money to fund other Farm Bill programs. They were looking around through all the couch cushions and discovered that if they changed the Cushion of Credit program in the way that they did under federal budget law, they'd be able to save that $2.5 billion. We were shooting for good policy. They were shooting for saving money, and that's why we had to be on defense there. And on the broadband piece, it was frankly because there were some folks out there nervous about their existing funding sources potentially drying up if, in fact, electric cooperatives got into the business of providing broadband in some areas that those folks maybe should be serving. And so they were taking a full run at us to try to limit our ability to do that.
Right.
So again, it wasn't a partisan issue. It was really more of a competing interest reason that we're playing defense.
And just a quick little explainer on Cushion of Credit for the listeners at home.
Yeah, so that's essentially an escrow account that RUS borrowers can use to deposit some money that then can only be used to pay back their RUS loans.
Right. All right. So that's a good segue into the coming year. We have a new Congress. We have a House that looks very different than it did the last 2 years. John, you're on the front lines of what's going on Capitol Hill. How do you see 2019 shaping up?
Well, the honest answer is you can never really tell. We're going from 2 years of one-party control to now we're back to divided government. So there will be a period of transition. The new majority, Democratic majority in the House, they have to get organized. They have to determine what their agenda is. There's an influx of new, younger, progressive members in their caucus. They're tending to internal family business right now. They've got an influx of new family members, and there's a balancing act between, the old guard, so to speak, and the new, more progressive-leaning members that are looking to make bold change right out of the gate.
Right.
And there are more established members who have been around the town for a while and, feel like they know how things actually get done in this town. Once that disciplines itself and settles itself, it'll be interesting to see how both the Senate Republican majority and the House Democratic majority interact, and just how much a foil the House Democratic majority will be for the Trump administration. Across the board, the standing committees of jurisdiction within the House Democrat infrastructure, they're pledging robust oversight. They intend to do significant oversight over what they feel are some ethical issues with certain Trump appointees and office holders or cabinet agency officials, as well as they want to do rigorous oversight over regulatory policies of the Trump administration. So we're going to have to navigate that. What are the implications of that messaging and that activity on our members' interests?
Does that mean that the legislative agenda comes to a standstill, or are we going to have to kind of thread the needle on getting stuff done despite a lot of background noise?
Well, I think there's always a potential for gridlock, but it's really incumbent upon us as advocacy professionals to find a way to thread the needle, come up with the strategies, build the coalitions around the issues that our members care about. And really, the key is going to be building bipartisan consensus on issues that we care about, issues that people in rural communities, the suburban communities that we serve, America's electric cooperatives are bringing our voices to the process and driving a consensus on issues that reach both parties, both chambers, that can appeal to a broad cross-section of members. Part of what we do is, in addition to advocating on specific issues, we also have to undertake an effort to educate new members of Congress and teach them about what it is to be a not-for-profit co-op. What does a cooperative business model entail? What are the unique challenges associated with providing electricity or providing energy in areas that aren't in urban centers? And why are energy policies and other public policy need to be addressed and reflected to adhere to those differences? So we spend a lot of time. We'll touch every new member office, either at the member level, most likely at the staff level, and educate them about who we are, what issues we care about, and then hopefully get off on a good foot with that relationship. And our goal then is to build as many friends and allies on Capitol Hill as we can.
Even in this realm of really a divided kind of a government with a significant partisan divide, significant ideological divides, it's not a time to sit back. It's a time to lean in and to be more politically engaged, not less. That's how we can continue to be effective, even in the face of more challenging odds of trying to get things done. Doesn't mean we let up on the gas at all. It means we push the pedal down just a bit more.
Without tipping your hand, have you looked at the issues that you think are most likely to play well in an environment like this?
Yeah, there's certainly a good chance, or at least a reasonable chance, of infrastructure legislation working its way through Congress next year. The president campaigned on that. Democrats have ideas that they want to advance about how to improve our nation's infrastructure, whether it's roads and bridges. We throw broadband into the mix, energy infrastructure as well. Republicans in the Senate are interested in that topic. So there's a potential there, and that's almost top of everyone's list in thinking about where there's the potential for bipartisan opportunities there. We're not naive to say that it's going to be easy, because anytime you're talking about infrastructure, it requires funding, and that nut has been very hard to crack. in the past several years. But that's an area where there's definitely an opportunity to expand on the work, frankly, that we did in the Farm Bill. The broadband programs in the Farm Bill this year were a terrific improvement, and we'd want to build on that in any infrastructure package. We'd want to ensure there are resources for a smart grid, maybe for electric vehicle deployment or rural charging stations, things like that, and making sure that any infrastructure bill doesn't just focus on urban areas, but focuses on revitalizing rural economies as well.
Right. Talk about cybersecurity. Is that something on the legislative side where there's a vehicle to do things that help co-ops, or is that more on regulatory side?
Well, it's a little bit of both. Partly we play defense on the legislative side for folks who want to, really go overboard. On the regulatory side, it's ensuring that there are some resources there for some of the research that is being done, for the coordination that's required between DHS, DOE, the utilities sector. The information flow and the information sharing is really the most important element of our government relations work in the cybersecurity space, and then the research as well. But John, there's been legislation in the past several years that we've had to push back because it's responding, kind of going overboard. You want to touch on that a shade?
I think the issue, generally speaking, is that we don't want to have an environment on Capitol Hill that has any of the threats. There's a variety of threats to the integrity of the grid, protecting the grid, and not overly emphasizing one threat over the other, and trying to maintain a balanced, informed discourse among policymakers on those issues so that there's an understanding of the highly regulated nature of the industry, the seriousness with which the electric utility sector takes their responsibilities, and all of the collaboration and information sharing that exists between the critical infrastructure owners within the electric utility sector, along with governmental entities that oversee and regulate standards and practices.
And this issue is a little different than other issues because the interests of the electric cooperatives are exactly the same as the interests of the others in the utility space, and that's exactly the same as the interests the government has and all consumers have. And that's keeping the system up and running, and should there ever be some sort of incident, that we can recover quickly from it without too much disruption. In other issues we have to work, there are competing interests that have to be balanced. This is one where everyone's interest is really aligned, and so it's more about coordination and sharing than it is about trying to resolve competing interests.
Right. Do you see anything coming up in the space of energy policy, energy law coming up on the Hill? Are we ripe for that, or is that kind of in the rearview mirror right now?
I think there will be a significant amount of discussion and debate and discourse on the Hill on all things energy and environmental policy, whether or not actual policy takes shape and is put into a package that could appeal to both sides. It's more of an open question. Congress has been, for the past few cycles, doing everything they can to put together a bipartisan, comprehensive energy package, and it always tends to fall short. But there will be, I think, a lot of interest in things like distributed energy resources. There'll be a lot of interest in storage. There will be a lot of discussion about trying to find ways to promote new forms of energy and renewable forms of energy. Part of the interest among the newly elected progressive Democrats is this concept of a Green New Deal and wanting to try and transition the U.S. economy to 100% renewable energy. So there's this fervor on the left to really go big, go bold, be aggressive. I'm sure there will be hearings. There's potential for there being a select committee on climate change. And so that will add to all of the chorus of voices on these issues. And then there will be pushback. And so it'll be a lot of discussion, a lot of ideas. At the end of the Congress, will there be any delivery? It is kind of an open question. I think we have to assess what the opportunities are. There's quite a lot of potential. I think Kirk mentioned the fact that seems to be bipartisan consensus surrounding infrastructure, and there's been talk in the past about having an energy title to an infrastructure package that might provide opportunities for investment in things like smart grid, investing in resilience, but there hasn't been a lot of detail to this point.
Right.
So we'll look to engage both sides to figure out what those details are and then how we factor into that type of a proposal.
One thing I think we and co-op leaders across the country need to keep in mind is that there will be a lot of proposals that come forth in the new Congress. and they will run the gamut of ideas from crazy on the left, crazy on the right, crazy in the middle, some very responsible, some very thoughtful. And it'd be important for us to remember that we don't need to swing at every pitch, that a pitch in the dirt is intended to be a pitch in the dirt. And we need to keep our eye on those balls that are more serious and more thoughtful and more likely for either advancing where we can help it advance to the extent it helps co-ops, or need to try to play some defense and block it. So a lot of the things that we'll see kind of on the fringes we'll have to pay attention to, but it may not be something we need to get everyone up in arms over for one reason or another because of the nature of the pitch in the dirt.
There's, 110 freshman members coming in somewhere around there? Have you had a chance to look at their backgrounds and see, A, if they have co-ops in their districts, and B, if they tend to engage well with those co-ops? Is that part of the analysis that's going on right now?
Well, we've done all throughout the election. We were paying attention to all the candidates who were non-incumbents who are running for office. There were a bunch of changes this year in a lot of suburban districts, and many of those are in areas that touch on co-op territory. So we've got maps for every congressional district that identify whether a district has 100 co-op consumers in it, 10,000 co-op consumers, or 400,000 co-op consumers. And we've also worked very closely with the statewide to try to identify those candidates who are running for office where we had some pre-existing relationship, or we know somebody who is a good friend of that particular candidate. And so we've got a number of examples out there where after the election, someone would email in and say, hey, by the way, if you ever need help with Congressperson-elect so-and-so, I go to the same church as them, or we used to do business together. So we've got a lot of those kinds of examples, but there are lots of others where we will need to go and introduce ourselves because especially folks in more urban and some suburban areas, we'll need to explain to them who we are, what we do, why we do it. And as they bring in their new 24, 26-year-old staff members, they'll need to know who we are and where we came from. Right. So there's a constant education element to what we do up on Capitol Hill. I mean, really our lobbyists are more teachers than anything else.
We just went through our regional meeting process where we set resolutions to be voted on by the membership. Talk a little bit about that process because I don't know if most of our listeners understand that part of co-ops. And then how does that inform what you then do when you go up to the Hill or the agencies?
Yeah, so the regional meetings are an opportunity for folks to give us sort of our marching orders, to come up with ideas they would like us to work on. And so this year there were some new resolutions, one on electric vehicles, urging NRECA to be supportive of policies that would encourage further electrification of the transportation sector. And that resolution passed each of the regions. It'll now go to the annual meeting. So the regions get their chance, and then everybody in the membership, all 900 plus members of NRECA, voting members of NRECA, get a chance to vote on those resolutions at the annual meeting. And really, those are the sort of policy goals that the membership has laid out for us. It's not getting into details of tactics, exactly how we do something, and maybe not even super specific on what exactly it is that they're looking for. But in this case of electric vehicles, it's, go support electrification of the transportation sector and deal with the tax credits for EVs, deal with fuel efficiency standards, all those issues that will either help or hinder the electrification of the transportation sector. And it's really then our marching orders, and the lobbyists and our regulatory advocates then take those and go work with folks on Capitol Hill and the agencies to try to come up with a list of accomplishments at the end of the year that says, hey, on this resolution, we got these 2 bills done. On this resolution, we changed this regulation for the better.
And as the lobbyist, some of these issues are controversial. And if you go into an office and you are advocating on an issue that might result in a negative reaction, it's nice knowing that you have a resolution that backs you up, that you know that you've got the cooperative membership behind your back.
They also give us a good opportunity to remain as nonpartisan as we can in this hyper-polarized environment, knowing that we're not out there bleeding red or bleeding blue, that we're bleeding the co-op green is really important. And so regardless of what party is presenting a bad idea, we'll oppose it. Regardless of what party is proposing a good idea, we'll support it, so long as it's in line with what our members have given us as their marching orders and their goals.
So let's look at the looming 2020 presidential campaign, something that's going to be pretty important in terms of how we structure our priorities over the coming year. How early in 2019 is that going to start impacting your ability to get things done?
That's going to be impacting 2019 and 2020 significantly, with probably almost a couple dozen Democrats interested in running for the White House, that's going to make it more difficult, not less difficult, to navigate sort of Washington space. And as those primaries heat up, there will be more focus on the 2020 election and less focus on legislating and policymaking, more focus on press releases and headlines. And so we'll keep our nose to the grindstone on the policy matters, but we'll also be very engaged in trying to make sure that anybody running for the White House knows who the electric cooperatives are, what we're about, what we're interested in, so that no matter who wins the White House in 2020, that individual and his or her team know who we are, know that we're significant players, and that we're not coming in, the day after the election saying, hey, here we are, that we've presented ourselves ahead of time to make sure that they have that awareness. It's not supporting any one candidate, it's not opposing any one candidate, but it's making sure that whoever winds up at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue knows who we are and that we've got a voice and we're going to use it.
And does that put a little bit of urgency on, if we have some priorities, trying to get them done as quickly as possible? Because once candidates start declaring, it's going to suck all the air out of the room.
Yeah, what we're hearing is there'll be a window for actual legislating that will probably stretch from spring of 2019 to early 2020, and then that'll be it. And so, whatever you need to get done, you better have that ready. It better be baked, it better be non-controversial, and it better be something consensus-driven. We've got a couple of priorities we're hoping to get done, and if we don't get done, will be top issues for the next Congress in the tax and benefits space, trying to reduce costs for our pension plan and to address the tax issue that deals with government grants and their treatment under the new tax law and how that can impact our members' not-for-profit tax status. Those are near-term priorities that have direct cost implications for our members. So we want those to be teed up early. So we've got strong bipartisan partners in both the House and the Senate, and we're going to be poised for finding the quickest path possible towards enactment.
Kirk, John, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having us, Scott.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks as well to you, our listeners. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast app. You can find links and more information on the NRECA website, electric.coop. Till next time, for Along Those Lines, I'm Scot Hoffman.